Hello, everybody, and a really, really warm welcome to today's webinar. It's a fantastic topic. I'm really looking forward to it. Creating healthy boundaries for better relationships, greater resilience, and well-being. And I'm delighted today. Our presenter is Dr. Mendy Neralic, and I'll be your facilitator. I'm Nicola Graham. Now, we like to start all of our programs with an acknowledgement of country. In the spirit of reconciliation, MS Limited acknowledges the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea and community. We pay our respects to their elders, past and present, and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples today. So it's with great pleasure that I introduce you to Dr. Mendy Neralic. Mendy is a clinical psychologist. She's in private practice in Brisbane. She's passionate about leading people to be active agents in their own lives by choosing how to respond to life's challenges. So something that we can all benefit from today. Mendy uses a combination of body, mind, soul and spirit-based approaches, which I absolutely love. And Mendy teaches people to take responsibility for changing lifelong patterns and become their empowered selves.
Okay, thank you so much, Nicola, and thank you for inviting me to speak to everybody here. We've got a really lovely big turnout and from a range of backgrounds as well. So hopefully today I'm going to be able to deliver a webinar to you that you're all going to be able to use, find informative, and start to implement into your daily lives straight away. So this topic of boundaries, I think, has always been an important one, but I think over the last couple of years in particular, the global events have really got us curious about how we want to live our lives, how we want to relate to people, and how we want to connect to people in a different way than perhaps we have been doing it. So I love that, if anything, that these changes have really got us questioning or asking these really important questions. Okay, so I'm going to jump right in. Hang on, that's it. And that's, Nicola's already told you a little bit about me, so you can read about that if you wish. I'm going to try and get through the content in a way so that we've got lots of times for questions and maybe a little practice even at the end. So today I'm hoping that you're going to all be able to develop an understanding of how your emotional, behavioral and cognitive patterns influence how boundaries play out in your daily life. Get to know your own or your typical boundary style and learn through lots of little practices and examples, ways that you might be able to revise any unhelpful patterns that you've developed over time so that you can establish new ways that you can relate to people, resolve conflicts and express your needs. Okay, so there's a bit of a bubble theme going, just to let you all know. I love this little description of boundaries by Pixie Lighthorse, who is a poet and a shaman. So that's why she's got that fabulous name. And she says that boundaries are the dividing lines between us and others, symbolizing where we end and someone else begins. So it's really simple, and it really conveys this idea that boundaries talks to this sense of an edge that we have, and that other people have an edge, and perhaps we can think of relationships and connecting, how we all navigate our edges. Okay, now this means that we can think of boundaries as being relational. So boundaries can tell us a lot about how we are in our relationships, our capacity to give and receive, and how we connect and disconnect. And boundaries isn't just about where we are, it's really that, that we're an individual in partnership with somebody else. So it both us and them, or me and them, create and contribute to these patterns in our relationships of giving and receiving and connecting and disconnecting. So boundaries have an important function to protect. So these edges are protective. They allow us to screen out anything that we don't want to come in towards us, and also to contain parts of ourselves that we don't want to share with other people. Okay, so both protective and containing. So healthy boundaries will cultivate within ourselves a sense of trust and safety, in other people as well, and a sense of well-being within ourselves. So when our boundaries aren't so clear, it can create relationship experiences that at one end may be draining and may be frustrating, but can go all the way through to being distressing, harrowing, or even dangerous. So having clear boundaries plays a really vital role in creating, sustaining healthy and satisfying relationships, and making sure that we remain vital and well within ourselves as well. Okay. Now, I'm going to begin with this, or just sort of set this premise for this webinar, that how we've learned to relate and enact our boundaries is rooted in our history. So we come into the world as, you know, individual souls with particular temperaments and personalities and talents, and we were born into particular families in a particular community and society and culture at a particular time. So what we bring to our relationships is part of us, but also how we've learnt to adapt to the environment that we have been raised in. So you can say that perhaps when we are relating to people, what we've done is we've really learnt how to navigate and fit into our original culture. So it may not always then apply to what we're doing now in our current relationships. You can think of this as our conditioning or our old patterns or habits of relating. So a really simple example of that might be, you know, as children, we're often taught to comply and not to question authority. So if there is a sense that to navigate and be safe in my family or my culture, school, work, etc., we have to obey and say yes, then as we become adults and we continue to apply that pattern or that habit, we might find ourselves becoming quite unhappy or unsatisfied or feeling inauthentic, and we may need to start to adapt to that, okay, to fit our current situation. So if we become aware of what our particular habits are in our relationships and how we set limits and respond to limits being set on us, then we have the capacity to choose which ways are going to work for us best. So this isn't all about our conditioning or what we learned in our families and our sort of societies growing up as being wrong, but we can't always think that that's the way we apply relationships or boundaries to all of our situations that we find ourselves in. So this means that in the present moment, we take responsibility for how we set limits. So it's not based on some pattern or habit, it's actually based on some reality that's happening right now. All right. You've got a little bit of noise in the background, so hopefully you can all still hear me well. So let's sort of just get a sense of, you know, what it means to have a healthy boundary or healthy boundaries. So someone with healthy boundaries knows that they have a choice. So they can choose to protect themselves and to screen out anything that's coming into them that they don't want. So it might be screen out unwanted attention or ideas or physical contact, and also to contain their own ideas and energies and actions as well. So people with healthy boundaries can say yes or no authentically. So this is based on their own preferences and desires and needs and rights and values. So this isn't based on any sense of I should or must or ought to do things a particular way because I've been told to. And people with healthy boundaries also know that everyone else has boundaries too. So I think we can get caught up in people kind of crossing or violating our own boundaries and forget that maybe we may be doing that to other people. So this means that you respect other people's boundaries and you protect them from your own projectiles. So we can also send out stuff that's unwanted for other people. And if we're conscious of doing that, we can kind of rein in or contain some of that stuff that's coming out of us. And people with healthy boundaries also have a sense of like it's a clean relationship, so that this exchange between ourselves and others, it feels equitable and feels dynamic. And this doesn't mean that it's a 50-50 split, so it's not about that kind of fairness. It's that these are my needs and this is this person's needs, and we can navigate and negotiate how we're going to make that feel good for both of us. People with healthy boundaries have a sense of themselves as both separate and connected at the same time. So they have an awareness of themselves as an individual that is living in relationship and connection with other people. And so their boundaries are responsive. And so that means they're flexible and they'll shift according to the needs and preferences of the moment, of the situation, and that the person that you're with. So your boundaries are not going to be the same, say, with your partner as it is with your child or a work colleague. So there is this kind of moving edge. Now, I really like this one, and I think this is important currently, perhaps, that we acknowledge, or the person or the people with healthy boundaries acknowledge and accept differences in opinion, thoughts, desires, and emotions. So there's a sense of knowing their own sort of thoughts and opinions, but also that other people may have different ones. And if that's the case, there's no need to always disconnect from that. So I think this is really important, so that we're not just surrounding ourselves with people that share the same values, that we learn how to be with people who have different values and opinions as well. But then at the same time, a healthy boundary person isn't going to flip or flop around those opinions and ideas. So they're not tend to be swayed. They don't tend to be swayed by other people's emotions and ideas and thoughts and actions. All right. Now, I think on your slides that I've given you, I've called this unhealthy boundaries, and I'm just sort of playing around with the language around that. I don't think that's quite accurate to call it an unhealthy boundary. So here I've described this as boundary breaches. And the truth is that we're all going to experience boundary violations or boundary breaches. So it's not necessarily a wrong thing. It's really important that we know how it feels or what happens when a boundary is being crossed for us, and that other people may feel like we cross their boundaries as well. So we're going to have these sort of experiences. So I've just kind of listed some words and phrases that might resonate with some of you, that you recognize when you feel like a boundary has been crossed. So I'm just going to read some out, and you can scan over them as well and just notice what seems to jump out for you. So you might feel disrespected or put upon or rejected, victimized, used, invaded, or unsafe. There's a sense of being taken advantage of or not trusting, giving more than you get, oversharing, feeling resentful or clingy or withdrawn or lonely. Or even you might hear phrases come out of you that say, you know, they made me feel like that, or I couldn't say no. So there's a sense maybe of being acted intrusively upon, or engaging in some sort of physical touch that you'd rather not. So just notice or just note, you know, which one seems to be familiar ones for you. I know that for me, this feeling of being put upon and resentment is very common for me. And this isn't about blaming yourself or feeling bad for feeling like that. This is about, or blaming the other person even. This is about recognizing that something is happening here that doesn't feel right, and that these experiences are cues for you to take some sort of action, and hopefully conscious action. So this is what a lot of my talk will be about today, making conscious action. But let's get a bit more of a sense of what boundaries look like. You know, what is it, what do I mean, or what is meant when someone says boundaries? Now, you can think of boundaries as being both external and internal, and a lot of us will have familiarity with this idea of external boundaries. So, you know, we have physical bodies, and so we can think of a boundary as being our physical edge, and so it's very solid and very obvious and tangible. And people know that, you know, if I touch somebody without their consent, then that's not okay, and you can say no to that. But there's also this idea of beyond your physical body, we have an energetic or personal space, and that can really vary between people and between people and between cultures as well. So some people may not feel like they need or want even a lot of personal space, whereas other people may feel like they need a lot more. And that this can also change depending on who you're with. So maybe even as we're talking about that, just get a sense of your own physical edge and your own sense of personal space and what your experience of that is. Now, what some people may not really consider as a boundary is this sort of space or edge around your inner world. And this is your world of thoughts and opinions and beliefs and emotions. So we can actually think of that being contained as well, that we can choose to let people into or not. All right. And boundaries can also be verbal. And I think this is what most people understand as, you know, when we're setting a limit, we set a verbal limit. So this is literally what we speak or say or utter. So not just words, but it can be qualifiers like yep, and as well. And non-verbal boundaries. So I think most people are familiar with this idea of body language, but if we can really understand that our non-verbals can speak very loudly and that they can be a very powerful way that we can both express a limit and observe a limit being expressed in somebody else, we may not even need to use words so much or all the time. So non-verbal boundaries are things like our body-based postures and movements and gestures and facial expressions that are conveying like a yes or a no, and also sort of somatic experiences, so sensations that are happening within your body or this felt sense that something's not quite right or something is a yes or something is a no. Now that noise has started up as well. So Nicola, if it gets too loud for everybody or you can't hear me, let me know and I will shut my window.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's fine at the
So
moment,
now
Neralic. We can hear it in the background, but yeah, it's fine.
Perfect. Okay, great. So what I want to do now is do a little imagination exercise that will maybe get you all to have a sense of this, our physical boundaries, our energetic boundaries, and our inner boundaries. And I'm going to sort of aim for maybe 3 minutes max to do this. It might seem like a long time for some people or a short time for some people, but I just want to, I think it's sort of nice to kind of encourage this sense of imagination. I don't think as adults we're kind of encouraged to do that. And it can be a really powerful resource when we're thinking about where our own edges are. So I want you to all take a moment to put down anything that you're holding in your hands, like your pens or your devices or books or anything like that. So drop them and let your hands go in your lap or down by your side, and get yourself comfortable with wherever you're sitting. So that might be in a chair or on the floor, or if you want to lie down even for the next 2 or 3 minutes, feel free to get yourself into that position. If you're a little bit more high energy today, you can even do this standing up, but get close to a wall in case you want to have a lean on there. So just if you're all sort of settled, I'm happy for people to close their eyes so that you can just listen. But if you want to keep your eyes open, that's totally okay as well. You might want to just gaze at the screen, if you like, with a very soft, almost like unfocused kind of gaze, so that you're not staring or going hard in the eyes. So settling in, take a deep breath in. Just big breath in and hold it for just like a second. And then breathe out through the mouth. And as you're doing that, just relax your shoulders, maybe wriggle a little bit in your seat, tap your feet on the floor, and do that again. So breathing in, hold the breath for a moment, and breathe out through the mouth. And just feel yourself settle in a little more, maybe relax the jaw, relax the belly, soften the throat. And one more time, just breathing in, hold, and then breathe out And just feel everything just soften just a little more, and just feel your body settling a little bit more into the surface that you're sitting on, tapping your feet on the floor, leaning back into the chair or the space behind you. And now can you get a sense of your physical edge, the physical edge of your body? And see if you can get a sense of that right at the skin level. So first, just draw your attention to the front of your physical body. So just noticing just sensations and the feelings on your face, maybe your chest and belly, maybe the front or the tops of your thighs and your legs, all the way through to the tops of your feet. Now, for some of you, it might be very easy just to connect to this felt sense, but some of you might benefit from some tapping or rubbing just on the surface of your skin or your body. So just allow that if that helps you. And now bring your attention and your imagination to the back of your body. So the back of your head, the back of your neck and the shoulders, back of your spine. Perhaps you can feel your back on the surface that you're leaning against. Back of your hips and legs, all the way through to the backs of your calves. And just feel and sense into the physical edge at the back of your body. Now, sensing into the edge at the sides of your body, so the sides of your head, your ears, sides of your neck, along the edges of your arms and hands, feeling into the sides of your ribs and your waist and your hips, all the way down the sides of your legs, knees, down to the edges of your feet. And if you're tapping or rubbing there, just notice the sensations that you can feel right on the surface of your skin. Noticing the bottom of your body, so the soles of your feet, and maybe even tap your feet a little to connect to the sensation there. And all the way through to the top of your body, so the tops of your shoulders and the tops of your head. So now sensing into the whole physical edge of your body, so the front of your body, the back of your body, both sides, top and bottom. I'm getting a sense of the whole three-dimensional surface of your body, okay, this physical edge. And take a deep breath in. And as you breathe out, bring your attention inside to just below the surface of your skin, to the inner space of your body, where you may start to be aware of sensations that are inside. So physical sensations might be things like tingling or buzzing inside your body, maybe some tightness or squeezing or softness inside your body. Maybe you can sense your heart beating, so a pulse or a throb. And keep going inside where you're aware of now the quality of your thoughts, so the thoughts and the feelings and the emotions that might be experienced inside, maybe some images or memories. So this is your inner world, and notice how it's contained inside your body. Take a deep breath in. And as you breathe out, bring your attention back to the physical edge, the surface of your skin, and then sending your attention out to just outside your body into the space around you, and start to kind of get a sense of being surrounded on all sides outside your body by this sort of semi-permeable edge or layer. And notice how this semi-permeable edge or layer is sort of filled with a golden light or a energy all around you. And just imagine that this sort of edge starts to expand into the space around you, so that you're surrounded on all sides, kind of like a bit of a golden orb or a golden egg of light that you can see through, and that you can look beyond, so that you can see what's coming at you and towards you, and slow down enough so that you can choose what you allow into this space, into your body and into your inner world. And at the same time, you're able to look out so that you're aware of what you're sending out, and you can slow it down enough so that you can choose to send out from yourself into the world in a way that's conscious and aware. So coming back, aware of this sort of physical or so this energetic edge, this physical edge, and your inner world, and take a deep breath in. And breathing out through the mouth. You can be aware of that all at the same time as you now perhaps open your eyes, if they're not open already. Blink and tap your feet and rub your body a little bit, and just come to kind of connect into your outer world again, so that you know where you are in time and space. Okay, I'm curious as how you all found that. So if you want to write down in the chat what that was like to you, I'm always curious as to how that kind of exercise lands for people. And know that at any time during this practice today, if you want to just check in with your inner edge, your physical edge, and your outer boundary, or that sort of external boundary or personal space, you can do that at any time just to sort of see where you're at. And you can use this as a resource, going into your relationships or into relationship with other people as well. Okay, look, but we'll keep moving. So I want to talk a little bit about nonverbal boundaries first before I talk about verbal boundaries towards the end of today. So, and this is really, I want to get this idea that it's really powerful to get us to be able to sense into what's happening non-verbally, because it's felt first. So if there's been a boundary violation, or if there's a need or preference with how you want to connect and relate, you're going to feel this first internally, and you'll communicate this to others primarily non-verbally first. So before you've even clocked that something has happened, and before you're even conscious of what you might want to say or do, your body is already telling you something. So this is the language that says a yes or no within your body. So what can happen though is you might want to do something and your body is conveying that, but you might override that. So you might shut that down. So you might want to connect and say yes to somebody, but your conditioning might say that's not safe, and it'll say no or pull away, and vice versa. So if you can become really aware of what's going on in your body and what your particular body habits are in your relationships and in setting and responding to limits, you're going to be in a really powerful position to really choose what you want to do, not based on your conditioning, but based on what's your preference in the moment. Okay, so what the problem is that some people come across though when we're talking about nonverbals, or what that even means, is they don't have a sense of what to look for, or a language around what that is. So I've listed below all sorts of ways that you might be able to experience what's happening internally and in your body or through your body. So if you can learn to attune to this and interpret what it's trying to tell you, then you're going to have a whole lot more information than what you have had before. So, you know, things like sensations like tightening or constricting might be telling you about what you need to do. It might be saying, pull away, that's not okay. Or softening or opening up or moving towards might be telling you something different as well. So pulling back, withdrawing, being still, they're all saying something to you. So what does that mean in the circumstance that you're in? Changes in your breath, like you might notice that your breath rate changes, or all of a sudden you're gasping or taking a deep breath, or your breath slows down. You might be sighing. You might notice that your heart rate changes, it slows down or beats faster, and your face and your facial expression can change. And remember, this is all stuff that you're conveying to other people as well. So if you are aware of what's happening and other people are able to interpret and read you well, then you're going to be able to convey more of what you want. So you might notice that your jaw is clenching, your eyes start to squint or they widen, your nostrils flare. You might be nodding and smiling, inviting more contact. You might be shaking your head or averting your gaze, which might be a signal to sort of step away. And even your body can actually move. You know, you might completely turn away or step back, or, you know, doing things like, you know, stop, no, or palms open, which is a bit more welcoming. Okay, so maybe just a little practice today is to really notice, what your body is doing when you're in relationship to people, without feeling self-conscious about it. Just starting to be aware. It might be nice to just notice what your typical patterns and habits are. Okay, and so going on from that, we can start to learn what our style of relating to other people are. And most of us are going to have like a default style, and this might be something that we've learned through our conditioning. So if you have a sense of this is what I typically do in relationships, or this is what I tend to fall into when I'm not conscious, we can learn how to adjust and revise that response based on what the best thing to do is right now versus reacting on how you've always done things. So we can always get, or not always, we can sometimes get caught up in these rules around responding and reacting to other people, saying things like, I'm the sort of person that likes to, just give it all, or I've always done things like that. So I'm just going to challenge you all and myself to sort of not get fixated on doing things in a particular way and start to be a little bit more flexible. So it's really easy to go down that path. So our conditioned response is the path of least resistance. So it actually does take work to pull back and do things differently and really choose a different response. So this is the work. This is the work of setting boundaries and changing our relationships with people or the way that we relate. So I'm going to go through a couple of these different styles, and this is why I don't really want to call them unhealthy. It's not unhealthy boundaries. It's just that we have these particular styles, and if you can identify where you might sort of sit, it's really great information for you. So Pat Ogden of sensory motor psychotherapy coined these terms underboundaried and overboundaried, and I find that they can be really helpful in understanding what our boundaries are doing. So this underboundaried style can be considered more, or if you're familiar with attachment theory, it's considered more of an approach attachment style. So this sort of person might be seen to be very giving and very sharing, maybe sharing too much. So their boundaries or their edges might seem or feel a little undefined or less firm, and maybe very open, to the point perhaps where there is really a sense of no boundaries or this sort of collapsed boundary. So someone who's more underboundaried might not feel like that they can defend or protect themselves, or in fact, they might feel like they shouldn't defend or protect themselves. So compliance is their default. So they'll tend to say yes, and that's because they want to make people happy, or it's important to please other people. It's a really hard thing to think that they've disappointed other people. And so they have problems saying no or setting limits. So just check in with yourself if this is familiar to either you as what you might do or what you see in others. So people who are more underboundaried might feel like they're victimized or they're being let down by other people. And they might not really have a sense of this inner world, so they might not have a real sense of what their needs and desires and opinions are. So they'll turn to other people for advice and direction, or default to, well, I'll just do whatever you're doing. I'm happy to do whatever. If you find yourself saying that, then that's kind of a little clue maybe for you. And so because they might not know really what they want, they have never thought about it, or it's never been important perhaps, or it's never felt important. And the other thing about someone who's more underboundaried also might not see that other people have boundaries. So people might experience them as sort of encroaching on their personal and energetic space. So there may be a tendency to be enmeshed or codependent with other people or in other relationships. Okay. On the other end of the spectrum, if you're thinking more in terms of attachment theory, the overboundaried person could be seen as more avoidant style. So they may pull back or withhold connection from other people or information from other people. So people who are around them might not get a sense of knowing them very well because they don't share very much. They'll pull away from contact, and people might see them, or you might be seen as being maybe a little too defensive or inflexible or rigid. People who are more over-boundaried might default to say no more often than yes, and they may not ask for help, or they don't trust other people to do the right thing by them, or do the work in the right way, or do the things in the way that they expect them to. So they can be very hypersensitive to intrusions and physical proximity. So in that little diagram, you can kind of see that there's a lot of space around this person. So they don't really want people to come close. And this means that they might aggressively set limits to others and be seen as more self-reliant and self-sufficient. Okay. Now, these are two extremes. So what we could see is a bit more of a pendulum style. And I know that I identify with this at times, where you can alternate between being under and then over boundaried. So perhaps there is a quality within you or a part of you that wants to give and open up and share with other people, and maybe you get too open or too sharing or too giving. And then what happens is you become disappointed, you feel a little resentful because people aren't responding to you in the way that you want them to. So you pull back, you put up walls, you avoid people, and you push other people away. But then you start to feel lonely and you want connection again. So you'll open right up again and give in and comply and say yes to too many things, and so on. Okay, so there's a swinging between feeling lonely and feeling vulnerable and resentful. And then there is this leaky boundary, which perhaps is many of us or most of us, where we can say, most of the time my boundaries are pretty healthy, but there may be some holes or gaps in some situations or with some people, or when you're in a temporarily vulnerable state. So like when you're sick, for instance. And this might be where you feel like, I've got really healthy boundaries at work. I can say no and yes when it feels right for me. But as soon as I get home and I'm sort of with my kids or something, I give in to everything. So what I want to do now, I think this is window of tolerance. So yes, before we do the poll, I just want to quickly and briefly explain how our boundaries might be understood, energetically and emotionally through this model of the window of tolerance. Now, some of you may be familiar with this, so I'm just going to briefly run through it, and hopefully you'll understand it enough from my description today. But I've also left a link at the back or the bottom of this webinar handout for you to go to read. So I've done a little written piece on my website there if you're interested in finding out more, because it can be a really powerful way of visualizing and understanding what might be happening emotionally and energetically. So if we have a look at this model here, you can see that top red line and imagine that that is kind of representing your upper limits of emotional and energetic capacity. And the blue line down the bottom is representing the lower limits of your energetic and emotional capacity. And so the space in between is literally the window within which you are able to stay calm and cool and collected in the face of everyday life. Okay, so if we were to follow then that sort of dark blue wiggly line that's going between, that's kind of representing perhaps an emotional and energetic state that we're experiencing when we feel like, my boundaries are clear and clean. I'm able to say no and yes in a way that feels good to me. I'm able to stay connected, but there's still a sense of integrity. Okay, so it's normal for our energy to go up and down. As long as it's staying within those two kind of edges, we feel safe. Now, what can happen when, say, we get triggered by a situation where we feel like our boundary is being crossed and we have one of those, say, under or over boundaried styles, we can get taken outside of our window and outside of our capacity to cope. And if we're not conscious, it becomes a more unconscious kind of triggered reaction where that might not really match the situation that's in front of us. Okay, so what's happening here? Say if we were to follow from that kind of trigger point, that red line, your energy starts to rise up and then above and over that upper energy, that upper line of arousal, so that you're more in a more hyper aroused, fear-based reactivity that says no, no way, which is a fight, flight, freeze response. That's more of a overreaction and an over-boundaried kind of response to perhaps not such a big deal. So that is a reactive unconscious response. And if, say, you were more of an under-boundaried style in that same situation, and we're following that light blue line, what you might see is initially there is a sense of, oh, something's not quite right here, but your tendency to be kind of compliant will mean that you will override that, collapse, give in, be more passive, and perhaps say yes, but then drop all the way down so that you sort of, your edges become more undefined and you give yourself over to the other person's request. Okay, so I know that was a little bit fast and furious, but I'll come back to it a little later. And like I said, you can go to the link at the back of at the end of the handout if you want to know more here. And I think at this point, Nicola, you're going to put the poll up. So this is just my little cue here. And what I want to get a sense from everybody is, you know, given this information that I've just provided to you or shown you, do you identify with having a particular boundary style? So just select one of the following. Do you feel like your boundaries are pretty healthy and clear? Under-boundaried, where you tend to give in and say yes. Over-boundaried, where you may sort of withdraw and say no. You know, a little bit swinging between, or healthy most of the time, but leaky in some situations. So go ahead and respond. I'd be really curious as to what people, how people see themselves or experience themselves.
Thanks, Mendy. So we've launched that poll and people are busy voting. I can see that about 80% of our attendees have voted, which is great. So I'll just give everybody a couple more moments and then we'll close that poll. We can't see who has responded in what way. So Perfect. It's all very anonymous.
Anonymous. Right. No one needs to know.
No one needs to know. Okay, so we've got about 85% of people that have responded. So I'm going to close the poll at this point and I'll just read out the results for you, Wonderful. Mendy, and for our attendees. So we've got we've got 4% of people who said healthy, 21% under-boundaried, 4% over, 52% are pendulum, and 19% are leaky.
Isn't that interesting? Yeah. Under-boundaried isn't surprising to me. I think compliance is and saying yes is really common. And again, this pendulum, you know, sort of going swinging back and forth as well. I can certainly relate to pendulum at times. Yeah, I think when I'm leaky, I'm pendulum, if that makes sense. Thank you so much, everybody, for responding to that. And what we're going to do next, I suppose, is, I'm going to just minimize me, I don't want to see myself, is talk about or show you, you know, what to do, you know, how you can kind of address this, you know, what is it that you need to do? So when you're doing the work, boundary work, what can help if you're under-boundaried? So when your tendency, I mean, this might seem really obvious, but it's not easy, okay? So when you're under boundary, this is about strengthening your no and making sure your yeses are conscious. So when you're saying yes, it's because you really mean to say yes, not because it's a default response. So when you're under boundary, this is about really becoming more connected to yourself and asking yourself, you know, what do I think? What do I want? What is my emotion here? Is this my emotion, or is this somebody else's emotion that I'm kind of tuning into and tapping into and guessing so that I can please them? So this is about allowing yourself to be selfish. And I know that people I work with who tend to be more of this under-boundaried style find this word really, really hard to kind of come to terms with. So I'm putting it here purposefully. This is about thinking of yourself a little bit and what is it that I want or need. So the resources to develop here are really more like strengthening resources. So grounding, and aligning and containment resources, both in body, mind, and emotions. So this is about helping you address this sense of collapse and being easily thrown off by what other people need or want from you. So developing, activating, and empowering words and actions and gestures. So non-verbally, this would look like, even practicing shaking your head, pursing your lips, or tuning into any moments that you are actually experiencing this, which might be saying to you, I actually want to say no here. My default is a yes, but I'm feeling like my arms are crossed and I'm shaking my head. So, this means I've got to say no. Even sort of doing like a stop sign with one hand or both hands and just practicing that just on your own can kind of help you get a sense of what your edge is. And even these sort of postural changes, tightening your body, squaring your shoulders. If you're working with a more over-boundaried style, this sort of person fears being taken advantage of and feeling vulnerable. So the work around here is really practicing moving in and leaning and moving towards people and saying yes in a way that feels safe. So the no's become more conscious and responsive. So of course you can still say no, but it's not just this default unconscious response. It is, I'm saying no because I really need no. And learning that proximity doesn't always equal danger. So it's about recognizing that perhaps I needed to be sort of defensive and push people away historically, but that doesn't mean it's always the case now. So the resources to develop here are about softening and opening up at the same time as feeling contained. Tensing and releasing exercises can help kind of get that softness, and gestures and actions that are about turning towards and leaning in. So smiling and nodding, making eye contact, leaning in and reaching out, asking for help, breathing out, that kind of thing. Okay. And if we were to look then back at the window of tolerance, we are kind of, I suppose you can think of sort of containing that kind of over response above and below the window. So when you get to that trigger point, what you're doing is you're noticing what your body is saying. You're noticing what's actually happening really in your environment. And is this really threatening to me? Can I actually open up and say yes here when my default is no? And can I kind of contain and draw in some kind of empowerment within my body to say no in a way that is conscious as well without defaulting to a yes? Okay. So I'm really conscious of the time, Nicola, and I said that I wouldn't do this, but I'm just going to skip over. There's a beautiful bubbles. This is relationship boundaries in action here, flexible, messy, imperfect. So I want to get to verbal boundaries because I think this is really important to kind of give everybody a kind of a template. So it's more that I'm going to give people some example words and actions that you can use when you are trying to say yes or no in a way that feels powerful and empowering. Without being disconnected. So it's really helpful to make sure that your non-verbals and verbals match. So you don't want to be sending an ambiguous message by, sort of saying yes, but actually meaning no. So move through kind of conflict and hot issues with real care for yourself and respect for others. So watch out for righteousness, a sense of self-importance or blame or resentment. So again, these are just clues for you to pay attention to, and just notice where you are in your window of tolerance. So what's your capacity, and do you need to resource yourself before you enter into some sort of difficult conversation? And it's really important that you continue to develop the skills that allow you to hold that tension so that you're not going way out of your window either way, above or below. Okay, so I've kind of just got like a little template here, and I suppose I've just got these here so that you can stick in your particular situation that you want to work with, and lots of examples here. So I know for some people speaking like this can sound a little harsh or too direct, and I've kind of done that purposefully. I want to sort of emphasize this more direct language that you can convey with compassion. And I want to also kind of get you to notice that I've not put sorry here or I apologize here. So I really want you to avoid apologizing for setting limits and expressing your needs. So things like, you know, being asked to do something that you're not able to do or not able to do yet, rather than saying yes, you might say something like, I'm not able to complete all of this today. It's too much work for me. I can have it done tomorrow. Or setting a limit for some attention that you're not comfortable with, dropping over unannounced, it's not okay. I prefer you text and check in first. And even stating your preferences. I prefer this meeting to start at this time, or I can't make this will work best for me. And right through to just saying straight out no, or this makes me feel uncomfortable, or yes, I can do that. You don't have to make things fluffy. So really practicing direct language when you're trying to set limits, and matching that with your nonverbals, your body language and your posture and your gestures as well. When you are in conflict, it is not easy to stay calm and cool and collected. So just watch for signs of overwhelm within yourself and others. So this is that, you know, developing self-awareness of what is actually happening within you, and you may need to resource yourself so that you stay calm. So give yourself permission to say, I'm getting a little overwhelmed right now. I need some time. So giving yourself time and giving others time if you're noticing that they're getting overwhelmed is really a great way to build trust in relationships. So staying connected with another person without losing yourself means that you express your limits. So if someone is crossing a boundary, say they're name calling, then that's a deal breaker. Express what your needs are without being attached to that. So just because you express your needs doesn't mean that those needs will be met. So that's recognizing that other people may not share that view, but it's still important to express them nonetheless. And when you're able to do that and respect other people's boundaries and have your limits respected as well, this builds connection and trust and courage as well. Okay, and again, just some examples here about how you can be in disagreement with somebody but still stay connected. So even if someone has said a whole lot of stuff that you don't agree with, but there was one part that you agree with, you know, you're right about that, or that's fair enough if they've kind of called you out on some behavior. If you need time to think about it, just asking for that time. Even expressing that you share a different view, but you can see their view. And just setting those limits again, you know, saying when you're available, when you're not available. And these last little examples here, I think are really important, because it means that we don't have to be perfect at this straight away. And we have to give ourselves a break. We must try, and we will invariably make mistakes or need to do things again and repeat them. So this idea of biding time and pausing is so important. So if you're this example, I'm finding this conversation intense right now. So if you're in overwhelm, I'd like to come back to this in an hour once I've settled. So saying I can't do this right now, but I do want to do this. I need to calm down. So give me that time to do that. So this is excellent self-care and trust building in relationships and conflict. This idea of redo and repair is vital. So this is, if you found yourself, say, agreeing to something that you didn't really want to do, you said yes very quickly, automatically, unconsciously, and then later on you go, oh, I just don't want to do that. Going back into the situation and saying, you know what, I know I said I'd do this, but I was reacting before I had time to think. This is what I can do instead. That's a redo. Or a repair might be when you have maybe encroached on somebody else's boundaries or harmed somebody in some way unconsciously. Going in once you've noticed that you've done that and going, you know what, I overreacted. I felt threatened when you asked for my help. I can't help now, but I can tomorrow. Thanks for understanding. That's a repair. That builds trust. Okay. And oh my gosh, I think we're done. So I've just got this little quote by one of my favorite teachers, Dr. Estes. And she says, right response carries insight and right amounts of compassion and strength mixed together. Injured instincts, so our unconscious conditioning. So our conditioning must be eroded by practicing and enforcing strong boundaries and by practicing firm and, when possible, generous responses, but solid ones nevertheless. Long quote, but really just the perfect words there. So, I mean, I've just put a little practice here. We're not going to have time to do that today, but please read through it as on your own and see if you can practice this maybe with a friend or even on your own. Some take homes here. I know I've given you a lot of information today, but if you can just maybe pick one thing or two things from today that I'm just to take home, that would be really great. So practice and commit to increasing awareness of your body signals of boundary violations. Understand what your boundary and relating style is, what's your conditioning. If you're more under-boundaried, work towards containment, strengthening and saying no. Over-boundaried, you'll work towards softening and expanding and moving in and saying yes. And it's important just to begin. Take some little risks about doing things differently in your relationships and how you set limits in your relationships, or how you welcome relationships into your life so that you stretch your window of tolerance. Doing small things often is really helpful, and give yourself time to absorb the information and implement new ways of relating. Be willing to make mistakes, so redo and repair are key. Avoid saying sorry, and avoid demeaning and diminishing and destroying people in your lives. So this isn't win-win. This is a win-lose. It's win-win. Okay. So that's it. Oh, we've only got a couple of minutes till 11. Thank you, Nicola. Thank you, everybody, for listening. Hopefully that was helpful for you. Have we got time for questions?
We have got time for some questions, Mendy, and thank you so much. This work is so useful. I wish I'd started to get my head across it many years earlier. And I think it's lovely starting to become aware where you are on that graph. The concept of that graph was fantastic. And I think for some, the window of tolerance. And I think for our clients as well, particularly in a really practical sense, they're often managing their fatigue. And so being able to consciously say yes or no is a really wonderful way, a tool in the toolbox for clients to start to manage their fatigue. We've had some lovely feedback, Mendy, and some great questions.
Oh, great. Okay.
So let me just
on that what you just said, this may not be a question, but just on that fatigue, you know, sometimes our windows will be really wide and that we've got capacity to handle more, and sometimes not so much. That's that idea of that leaky boundary. So recognizing I'm tired and I don't have as much capacity today to say yes or no, and really protecting yourself in that way is really helpful, perhaps hopefully for the people that are listening. To know that.
It's such a key message when we run our wellness lunches, Mendy. It often comes up that people say one of the most useful things they've learned is how to say no and how to set appropriate boundaries. So I really encourage people listening to do as you say and practice with this. We had lots of lovely feedback on the exercise, how refreshing. Sam said she found it really refreshing. Michelle said she hadn't really ever thought about her back body before. Another Michelle said she, liked being able to rub and touch and get in touch with her body, which was really nice.
Beautiful.
Linda's said this concept of boundary styles is very new to me and it's going to take me some time to understand. Can you refer me to some useful YouTube clips or podcasts or websites that she could do some further reading?
I've sort of pulled a lot of this information from all over. What I might, leave it with me, and if I can send you, Nicola, some resources around that. I know this under Overboundaried is Pat Ogden's work, but I don't know whether she's explicitly talked about this anywhere. If I find her talking about that in particular, I'll send you links to that. But it is based on attachment theory, so there are lots. Diane Poole Heller talks a lot about attachment theory, and so I reckon she would, maybe not in terms of boundaries explicitly, but she might help people understand this idea of avoid and approach and avoid. So I think Diane Paul Heller, that's her name, I think she's done some things on Sounds True, some podcasts. So, but leave it with me. I'll have a think. I want to make sure if it's new, especially, you don't want it to be too dense. You want the information to be a bit more accessible. So I'll try and find some really easily accessible resources for people.
Thanks, Mendy, and I'll distribute that to all of our attendees.
Yep. Yes.
I'll just finish with one question here, and it's from Linda, and she said your friends might be shocked at the new you and the new ways you're interacting. I'm concerned some friendships may be lost.
Yeah, that's a risk, isn't it? I think there's a little quote at the end, and it's it says it only takes one person's shift to create a new ripple. Definitely. And I think it's important, though, that we're authentic in the way that we relate to people, so that we can see, what are my friendships based on? Were they based on me just saying yes, right? And some people may actually not like that. So I don't know. I do hear that a lot, and I hear some people go, you know what? I realized that this relationship was really inequitable. It wasn't clean. It wasn't that clean relationship. But at the same time, some people go, great, good for you, fantastic. I totally understand that. I've had that relationship with my sister, actually. My sister never used to set limits, and all of a sudden she started to. It was surprising, but I liked it, and I did have to adapt and adjust to that myself. So hopefully that answers your question, Linda. Definitely, but I think it's worth it. This is about you being authentic, and not putting yourself second. Yeah.
Beautiful. Thanks, Mendy. We've had lots of people say thank you and how useful they've found the session. So I'm just going to finish now with a few housekeeping slides for everybody. But thanks so much, Mendy, for all your wisdom and your years of experience working in this space. Really appreciate it. And there's a lot of really good information. People can also get a hold of the recording so they can have a further listen if they'd like to.
Great.
Just want to point out to people we have lots of services to support you. We operate in the NDIS space with allied health, and we can help with plan, support and coordination, amongst many things in the NDIS area. We have a MS helpline service with social workers and nurse advisors and MS specialists. We've got employment support for you, residential care, wellbeing and peer support, education, etc. And we also have lots of resources. We've got some amazing podcasts for you to listen to. We have our professional development online courses. We've got an online library, etc. It was also brought to my attention today about a survey that's happening for some research around intimacy and relationships, which you might like to contribute to. And if you do, the survey link is here. So it's tinyurl.com/MS intimacy. It's a study being run by Sydney University. So please feel free to have a look at that if you'd like to contribute to that research. The gateway to all of our services is through our 1-800-042-138 number, and encourage you to call or to email msconnect@ms.org.au if you'd like to access any of our services or if you'd like any support or help or advice. So thank you so much for your time today. It's been a real pleasure having you here doing the webinar with us. A big thanks to Mendy again, and we look forward to seeing you at our next webinar, and I will send you a list of some of the resources. Thanks very much. Bye for now.